Hello, Donnegal here. Today we are going to talk about character arcs. We're going to talk about how to take them on a journey of their own. Let's get started. On the surface, the character arc is actually pretty simple. Your character goes from point A to point B, and you have to figure out the steps in between to have it make sense for your readers and be logical as a progression. Let's talk about what different character arcs your characters can go on. There are three main types. The most popular one is probably the positive character arc. Sometimes it's called the hero's journey. This is where you have a flawed character at the beginning of your story, and they progress to learn a lesson or a truth about themselves and become a better, more solid, stronger person. And they not necessarily overcome all their flaws, but that lie that we talked about in that first video of the series, that lie, they subverted it, they have rejected it, they have conquered it, and they have accepted the truth that they have been missing this entire time. Now, I say they might not necessarily get rid of all their flaws, because flaws can continue throughout their life, and we'll talk more about this near the end when we're going to talk about using a character arc in a series. The next character arc that is pretty common is going to be the sometimes called the flat character arc, or also occasionally called the growth arc. For this arc, there's not too much change happening. It's more that your character grows more into who they are and more into their beliefs. Occasionally you can have like a shifting of opinion or perspective for the character, but not too much changes. Another way of thinking about it is that they kind of have to influence the worldview around them because they already know the truth that needs to be learned, and they're trying to help other people learn this truth. This happens a lot in dystopian stories, so think Hunger Games, Divergent. You have these characters who inherently know what needs to happen, what is wrong about the world, and they know what is right, the opposite of that wrong, and they strive to push forward and continue to believe what is their truth, and then continue to embrace it and grow into it. And they normally bring other characters into the fold because of their commitment and their conviction in that belief or truth. The other character arc is the negative arc, or occasionally called the fall arc. A lot of the times you'll see this in villain origin stories, but it doesn't necessarily have to always be there. It's basically where you have a character that already knows the truth, but they're tempted by a lie, and by the end of the story, they've become a worse version of themselves. Some examples of these different arcs. The most prominent is the positive character arc, or the hero's journey. Think about Bilbo Baggins from The Hobbit, Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. If you want some flat or growth character arcs, Samwise Gamgee is a fantastic example of this. He really stays the same throughout most of the story, but he really just grows into his confidence and his courage and being a great friend. Another example would be, I think Legolas is a good example of this. Though there is an argument there to be had that he also has a positive arc. If you look at his relationship with Gimli the dwarf, you could say his flaw is that he's very judgmental. He's very elf-centric with their whole, dwarves aren't acceptable. But then by the end of the trilogy, he absolutely is best friends with this dwarf. And if you want more of that kind of character arc, look at the Hobbit movies as well. And let's talk about the negative character arc. This might be a little controversial, but I would say that Frodo Baggins has a negative character arc. He starts out as this young, happy hobbit who really just wants to help the world be better. He wants to go on adventures like Bilbo did, and he wants to do good. He wants to stop this evil ring from taking over the world, and he volunteers to go to Mordor to help people, just because he feels he can. And then by the end of the trilogy, he's in Mount Doom and he has the ring and he's dangling it over and he can't do it. If Sam wasn't as good of a friend as he was, Frodo would be all alone, would be completely just isolated, and he likely wouldn't have made it there at all. But he cannot throw the ring into the fire, and he even plans to put it back on and disappear. He was going to leave Sam there. The only reason the ring got destroyed was because Gollum went ahead and attacked Frodo and ended up falling. That is the only reason that the ring was destroyed. So that is an example of a negative character arc. Like I said, most of the time it's a villain origin story, and I'm not saying Frodo is a villain, which is why I wanted to bring him up as an example, because it can be a really fun way to explore how your characters go forward, and this also will be really helpful when writing a series. So for formulating a character arc, you want to think about where your character is going to start and where they're going to end. Because the main thing you want to be considering when you are drafting or plotting this arc is how is it going to affect your character's inner world? How are they going to change as a result of this arc and these things happening, these events? How is it going to affect the outer world? If you don't know where your story is headed, how can you know how your character will be affected? And if you don't know how your character already is, how can you figure out where they need to go? For example, I was recently creating a character for the novel I'm working on, and I was a little stuck by why he would do this thing I needed him to do. So I was thinking about it, and I realized, well, I know that by the end of the story, he's going to be really stand up, he's going to be very humble and confident, and someone that people look up to. However, the flip side of confidence is actually arrogance. So the difference between that is confidence is all about believing in yourself. You believe that you are good enough, you understand this. And arrogance is usually rooted in believing you're not good enough, and you look at other people, you kind of think they might be looking down on you, so you look down on them. A lot of times you'll have characters who are arrogant, belittling others, dismissing them, and really it's just them hiding their own insecurities. So now I have a character arc. He's going to go from this arrogant guy who thinks he knows everything, thinks he's all that, no problems, to someone who can actually grow into his actual abilities and realize that he doesn't have to put people down to be true to himself and to be good enough. So to figure out your character arc, ask yourself 3 questions. First question, who is your character at the beginning of the story and what are they like? Which, if you've been following the series, you should know a little bit about that. You should understand what their flaws are, what their lie is, what they believe, how that's affecting them, and then have some character traits that you can play around with. Question 2, what do you want your character to be like at the end of your story? The third question, which is probably the trickiest question, is what events need to happen to make that change occur? How do you take your character from this guy to this guy? With character arcs, it is mostly about transformation. That is the biggest thing that you want in a character arc. Either the character's transforming or they're transforming the world around them by staying strong to their beliefs and their ideals. Overcoming or succumbing to the lie or the misbelief is critical to having a well fleshed out character arc. But overcoming or succumbing to flaws is optional. Let's say I'm someone that has an issue with my anger and I want to be better about it. I want to be more patient going forward. That's great to acknowledge, but it's harder to implement. So every day I would have to take steps to try and achieve that goal. And it's going to be the same for your characters. But when you intrinsically believe something, let's say I believe I am not good enough, and you intrinsically believe that, and then you realize, oh my gosh, I am good enough, and you intrinsically believe that instead, your beliefs and the way you see the world is much harder to change than, the way that you interact with it. How to implement this into a story structure. So I went ahead and put together some of the more common story beats that you will probably want to keep in mind for your character arc. You have the setup, which is basically just introducing your main character and showing what is wrong with their life and what they misbelieve and how they are flawed by that. So basically showing the reader what needs to change for this character to be happy. Now, of course, if you're doing a negative character arc or a growth character arc, it might be a little bit different. With like a flat arc, you're probably going to be showing what's wrong with the world and how can the character's beliefs have them stand apart and help influence the world to be better. If you're doing a negative character arc, you're going to want to go ahead and show how this character is really great and how there might be a truth they believe, but you'll also want to show how they could be tempted away from it, how that lie can creep in and tear them down. Or if you're just going the route of having it like the positive character arc, but instead of accepting the truth, they reject the truth and accept the lie. Then you would again show how they're flawed and what they need to learn. The next beat will be the inciting incident, and sometimes this is called the call to action, and this is just going to be the push that your character needs to force them to change one way or the other. And this is when all the events that are going to start challenging their lie is going to kick off. Next, you are going to have the midpoint, which is in the center of your story, and this is going to be when the character starts to get an inkling of what they've been going after, what they want, might not actually be what they need to fix their life. And they're going to start gravitating towards their need versus their want. This is not going to happen like immediately. Okay, you still have half a book to write, But gradually, this is going to start being the change that they start to see and feel and understand. After that, you are going to have their darkest moment. This is when you bring your character so low because of that lie that they have been believing, that it's either sink or swim. This is when their lie is going to be challenged the most, when they're going to have to confront that what they have been wanting, what they've been striving for, isn't going to solve their problems. Or if you're in an arc where they're going to reject their truth and embrace the lie, this will still kind of be similar. That's going to bring us to the next beat, and that's going to be the climax. Your character may have already accepted the truth, but this is going to be the moment when they prove that they have learned their truth, and that they are going to go towards what they need or accept what they need in their life to make it better and make them happy, or vice versa with a negative arc. And the biggest thing about this is, like, this is still going to challenge that lie. There still might be some temptation, especially if your character doesn't feel they're good enough. There's still going to be that moment where they prove to themselves and others that they have changed. And more importantly, they've proved to the readers that they have changed. Something to think about is the opening of your story, so the setup, and then the resolution, which is the next beat point that you want to go ahead and think about in your character arc. The setup is really just showing your reader, this is where we are, this is how this character is, this is what needs to be fixed with them, or what they need to fix or figure out. And then the resolution is where they can go ahead and see how far they've come. And a lot of movies do this, actually. You can go look at the first scene with the character that has the arc and the last scene, and usually it is very, very different. And you can see how far that character's actually come, even though as you progress through the story, you might not be noticing it too much as a viewer or reader. Another thing I want to talk about, because I don't believe I touched on it in our character creation part 1 video, there's this thing called sometimes it's called the fatal flaw or the shard of glass. Most recently, I just heard it called the ghost. It's very connected to the lie that this character believes, but it's the event that happened in their past that made them believe the lie, that overran whatever truths or things they knew before to cement this lie into their very being and have it infiltrate the rest of their world and their relationships. And it's good to note that this might change in every single book. For example, with series, you can have a new ghost in each book, and that ghost can be caused by the previous book. And that brings us to character arcs over a series. And you can do this in so many different ways. For the character arc I was talking about earlier, you have arrogance to confidence. You don't want that to drag out over, say, like 3 different books. That will want to have your readers being bored, and they're not going to feel any closure at the end of the first book, the one that's supposed to draw them in. So in each book of your series, even though your plot might span the entire thing, each book you want to have some closure, and you want to have a full story. You want a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you want that to be the same for your character arcs. So the way to do this is you can play around with it. You can have a positive arc to positive arc to positive arc, and you can just jump off different lies, or like I was saying, you can have a new, like, the events of the first book. Maybe it ends and they saved the day, but they lost someone very important to them. That can create a new ghost and a new lie for them to conquer in the next book. And you can do all of that positive arcs. You can do it all growth arcs. Probably not all negative arcs. Those can be a little difficult for your readers to absorb at some point, unless you're trying to make a specific statement and be very deliberate. But you can also do a positive arc to a growth arc, or you can do a growth arc and then a positive arc. You can do a positive arc, a negative arc, and then another positive arc to have like a dip. Play around with it and see which one you like writing the best, which one makes more sense for your characters and the story you want to tell. It's very great to kind of plumb the depths of what came before in the story to show what's going to come next, especially since that's how life is. Like, you learn some lessons, and sometimes learning those lessons and the journey to learn those lessons gives you new problems to solve. You can drag those into the next book and have the character then have to focus on that. Or maybe the lie was just the biggest thing that they had to deal with, and now that they've solved that, they're forced to realize that there's some more layers to it. One thing I would say you don't want to do is you don't want to repeat arcs. I'm sure we've all had this where we'll watch like a television series and they'll just keep doing the same thing. I remember I was watching Once Upon a Time and The Vampire Diaries, and this happens a lot with villain characters. They'll have a villain character and they'll redeem them. I'm thinking Regina Mills and Catherine Pierce. They'll redeem them, and then they're like, oh, we kind of need a bad guy, and so they'll plunge them back into being a villain for some reason, and it's so irritating. Do not do this to your readers, okay? If you're gonna redeem a character, and that's not to say that they can't still make bad decisions and they can't still have room for growth and learning. That's why I was saying you probably don't want to do a negative arc, unless you're doing villain origin story. No, Bethany Atazadeh did a 3-book series for her character. I believe her name's Jezebel. She's basically the evil queen in these fairy tale retellings, and she talks about how she went from being a good person to being what is perceived as the evil queen and how she got so warped. I believe that is over 3 books. I highly recommend any of her books, and that is definitely one that did really well with navigating that negative character arc. And then finally, because again, I don't think I mentioned it in my character creation video, I wanted to give you a few examples of really basic, simple misbeliefs that you can start with for your characters and their arcs, and then you can make it more specific to them. There is I need to be perfect. I am not loved. I am a failure. I am not enough. I am not capable. I don't belong. I can't miss out. I can't trust anyone. And I don't matter. These are the 9 archetypal misbeliefs that you can play around with. These come from the Enneagram, which is a personality test. It's very detailed, and this can also be helpful with writing characters. I'm still playing around with this myself, but if you want, I'll link below. I know Abby Emmons talks a lot about it, and I think she just started a new series about character creation with the Enneagram. I hope I went ahead and helped clarify for you how character arcs can be used, the different ways you can use it, what a character arc is, why you might want to know about it, why you might want to implement it in your writing. And let me know if you have any questions, as always, and if you want more content like this on this channel, please like and subscribe. It helps so much. And let's just keep this conversation going. Until next time.